So I get pregnant, and my ex had said that it was really important to him that at my age, which was mid to late 30s, that I should want to start getting pregnant or thinking about that. And, I'm a smart businesswoman, and maybe it was just out of love. But what was the rush? I was launching a cocktail. I was launching Skinny Girl. That's why I ended up unexpectedly having a pregnant belly, and I'd have to go to liquor signings in stores. I mean, I can only imagine what my partners were saying when I had to have a pregnant belly and go to liquor stores, because I was never allowed to take a picture with the bottle on my signings because I was pregnant. It was just not the ideal time. And in my gut, I felt the whole thing felt strange. And then we got engaged during that time. And it's just, in your gut when something just feels off, but you just keep, for people that feel like when you're engaged, oh my God, or you're in a relationship with someone, you can't, your parents will be upset, or then you're engaged and everyone's expecting a wedding, and like you get layered. And the more things that get added to it, it seems more like you can never get out. But if you feel like you shouldn't be doing something in your gut, if you don't know, yes, it's no. And so many times, from getting pregnant to getting engaged to doing the show, like you just keep on the road. And so I don't know what you think is going to get resolved. Like you think it's you blame yourself, you're flawed, a million things that happen. And so getting pregnant, we almost broke up many times. Like I wanted to break up, but it was like fear, and you're pregnant and you're doing the show, and it was just. And I remember I was at an appearance and started bleeding like a lot, and I had to go on bed rest. And my ex said his parents, who lived 2 hours away, were coming in, and they were coming over when I was on bed rest. And I said, I don't want to see anyone, and I don't want to come over. And my ex said to me, insisted that they come, and I didn't want them to come. I was on bed rest, and I felt like this dynamic was being forced on me, and this power struggle was being pushed on me, because I've read later, years later, I read that when you're the moneyed spouse, it's a common thing, if the moneyed spouse is a woman, that a man will feel emasculated, and they will feel like they have to overcompensate in different ways. And it's not something in the beginning. So when we're in the restaurant and we're talking about, I'm buying the apartment and this person's going to buy the furniture, or we're on vacation and I'm paying for all of the air and the hotel, but this person's paying incidentals. In the beginning, that all sounds logical. And you can be on a talk show and you can have a therapist come on and say, we had to handle that, where the man's the manny, in the relationship. Both people, so it's not awkward, put money into the middle pot, and then all house, expenses are paid through that. And they make it all sound so logical. And they because I listened to all of it and I did it. We had a account over here, and then I'm supposed to hand my credit card to the man in the relationship so he can be the man at the table and he can pay versus me paying, because that's going to be emasculating. And this is what the people who used to come onto my talk show used to say. So we tried all these things, and it was still awkward. It was awkward that I paid most of the rent. It was awkward, all of these things. And then there becomes this power struggle, because the person that you're in a relationship with resents you for the career that you have. And I'll never forget, I was in my relationship and we were discussing career, and my ex was a trainer when I met him, and also sold pharmaceuticals. But he used to say that he hadn't found what he wanted to do with his life, or he hadn't found his calling. He's the only person in my entire life of 53 years on this planet that has ever said to me, well, not everyone's like you. You're lucky. And I went bananas. Like, no one's ever accused me of being lucky versus hard work in my relationship. And so there was a power struggle, and it would come out in different ways that you wouldn't expect. And any women who are in relationships with men that may feel emasculated, or there's a disparity in income, or the woman is the moneyed spouse, it would come out in non-ways that you would think. So I was on a book tour and I was 6 months pregnant, and I was exhausted, and I wanted to come home and miss Texas, I think it was. And I was excited I would come home. And I said, let's just be together. Let's just be alone. He said, no, my parents are coming in. It was a separate time. His parents are coming. And I said, right, but they live 2 hours away. Just cancel them. No, Just because you drop your tour doesn't mean we're all going to change our plans. It wasn't for a holiday or anything. And it was just like, but I canceled the tour so I could be home with you. But it had to be the power struggle. So, like, his parents had to be forced on me. And I had a decent relationship with them, and we would go there. He wanted to kind of go there every other weekend, and I didn't want to go. It would be we'd have to go there, or they'd come and stay in our apartment, 2-bedroom on a pullout every other weekend, and I didn't want that. Like, I never, that wasn't what was presented to me. And you could have parents that live with you, and that's your own choice. It wasn't what was discussed in our dynamic, and it became very suffocating and it became very overwhelming. And it seemed like it was an overcompensation, which is totally understandable for a family member that was lost in the relationship. But when we went to see a therapist and my ex divulged that he never cried and went right back to college when his brother passed away, I thought that was a flag to me. Like, who doesn't cry when their sibling passes away and goes right back to school like nothing happened? I understand people want to go back. It just, there were things that made me question, like a chip, like an emotional thing, like in the relationship. And so on many different occasions, there would be these forces of power, like trying to insert power in places where they don't seem like, I've learned this in a lot of therapy, where they seem like they are necessary. And it's because when someone is feeling powerless in a relationship because of what they do for a living or because of the amount of money they have compared to the other person, therapists have said that they will try to exert power in other ways. There was a time when we had just bought a brand new apartment and we had gone away for an appearance I was doing in Atlantic City. My ex's friend came, and I'll never forget it. He came up off the escalator and he did a fist pump or fist pound, whatever you do. And he had a girl with him that was blackout drunk. They had had 6 Long Island iced teas, they said, and they showed up to a casino where I was doing an appearance at, because they live not far. And she was blackout, and she started to pass out in a sushi restaurant where we were eating. And I stood up and had to take her to the restroom. And I went to my ex and said, like, this is not, like, what the fuck? This is not acceptable. Like, this girl is blackout and I'm horrified, and I'm working here. Like, the guy was fine. The girl was out of her mind. Like, when I say blackout, they had been at, I think it was like a sports game, like a baseball game all day. I think it was. They'd come from a sporting event and been drinking all day, rolling into Atlantic City. And she was totally passing out. And it was my responsibility because he couldn't take her to women's room to take her. And I was feeling this albatross of this responsibility. And then shortly thereafter, we bought an apartment in New York City. And my ex and I was paying for more of the apartment. And I think it was my credit that was on the lease. And my ex said when we went away, and I just designed this apartment, and he said that they were going to stay in the apartment while we were away, this particular couple. And I said, absolutely not. The reason I bring this up is this became a massive fight, so much so that I remember it 15 years later, because it was a massive fight, and it felt like, and it was that same conversation over and over about the power struggle. After I sold my business and made all this money and wanted to get an apartment downtown, and I wanted to use a person who specialized in downtown. And I'm sorry, it was my money. It was money that I earned. And my ex verbally abused me because I didn't want to use his friend, who he had told me previously had been very close to losing his job, B, he didn't respect the way this guy was doing his job, and he gave different examples, like he's dumb examples. He was like, I don't know why he doesn't try to send a car for someone when they're looking, or he's on the verge of losing his job. So he had a friend that was a very good friend. In fairness to him, it was a very good friend, and he was a very good, loyal friend. And this guy, who he said was not doing that great, was an Upper East Side real estate agent. Now, you specialize in your area. And when we were looking not on the Upper East Side, we were looking downtown in Tribeca. The first money I ever made in my entire life. I was pretty much broke to my late 30s. Now I made my first money ever in my life. I was buying an apartment. I didn't want to use a real estate broker that had issues keeping their position and wasn't making like their quota or whatever it is. You have to make a certain amount or have certain sales, and also didn't specialize in Tribeca. That felt to me like a fairly fair business reasoning. My ex went crazy. An exertion of the power struggle because he was feeling emasculated because it was my money and I wasn't willing to compromise and use a person who doesn't know the area and has had no history of selling everything in that area. But this was like a knockdown drag out, and there were these fights that I remember because it felt like there was a disparity in the power. And like you were being I felt a little bullied because I wasn't doing what he wanted me to do in situations where I felt like I was pregnant. I was on bed rest. I felt like I had just picked a girl up off a bathroom floor who was passing out and who was blackout. And I was supposed to, and I was supposed to be okay with the fact, that we were at an appearance and this is who his friend brought. I was embarrassed and I thought like I'm getting paid for this appearance and I can't have people like passing out in a casino. It's a liability. And then that I was supposed to want those people to stay at my apartment. That I was supposed to want his parents to come stay at our apartment when I was bleeding and I was on bed rest. And that now I was supposed to use his friend's realtor because it's his friend and he's loyal. But it's his, and I know we're married and it's our money. It's not our money. It's not really our money. And we came to find that later in a divorce. We can say it's our money, but not men who have $1 billion who've been working for 40 years and the woman's been supporting him the whole way through. They don't think it's the woman's money either in many cases. She supported him the whole way. Here we are a year and a half into knowing each other. I've gotten pregnant before I wanted to. My body, my choice. I'm stupid. And I will never regret my daughter for 1 minute. But I get pregnant while I'm launching a liquor brand 6 months into a relationship. Okay? And now I'm going to spend $5 million, the first money I've ever spent. I'm terrified out of my mind. I'm supposed to just use his friend who he told me several things about and who doesn't specialize in this area. I felt like I was like bullied and waterboarded and like flogged and like I was on a road I could not get off of. It kept getting worse and kept getting deeper. And then we're going to get into, and I think we got into the prenup, but the prenup was something that my agent said I had to do. I didn't want to do it. I said it last time, the goo goo gaga. And I signed what would later be called by Alan Majewski and Ronnie Schindel a shitty prenup, but better than not having one, but a shitty prenup. And in fairness to the lawyer who drew it up, he's like, I cannot in good faith I should not be letting you sign this. Because I felt bullied and controlled in that, and it was never not brought up to me. Every day of our relationship, the prenup was brought up. Someone once said a prenup is a poison injected into your relationship. So when people don't want to get married because they don't want to sign a prenup or they don't want to be in a contract, it's not like a prenup only is for the person with the money. It's just like it can be a poison injected. It was brought up all the time, every day, and in fights, in conflict, even more. And hung over my head with like why I should be doing things for my ex in different situations because of the prenup. So when he agreed to be on the television show, and we agreed to get married on the television show, and I didn't want the show to be about us. The show that I pitched and sold and Andy Cohen bought and I was promised was going to be about my business. My business. And it ended up, the ball kept moving, and then it was like, well, but you're engaged. And it was never supposed to be Bethenny getting married. It was supposed to be about my business. And the ball kept moving. And I kept saying, I don't want this to be Tori and Dean. I don't want this to be Tori and Dean. My gut inside my body said, I don't want this to be Tori and Dean. I don't want to like involve him in this. And yet he could say he didn't necessarily want to do it. He was doing it to support me. But I would show up after work. I would show up to shoot, and he would already be mic'd at the house in scenes that he didn't even need to be in. And in fairness to him, the producers would call him directly and say, hey, we want to shoot. But like it was suffocating because then he wasn't really getting paid. And then he wasn't really getting paid because the show wasn't supposed to be about him. So then I took part of my salary because I felt guilty. I forgot all this. This is flying out of me right now. I forgot this. I took part of my salary, negotiated, and gave part of my salary to him because he was supporting me in it. And he kept throwing up to me that he's doing this and he signed a prenup, and he's doing this and he signed a prenup. But lo and behold, he would be shooting when he wasn't even needed to be shooting. He had a mic on and was at the apartment before I was shooting. So he seemed to be saying he didn't want to be shooting, but he was like there at the ready ahead of time. And it was like, I felt like it was like moving so fast. Like I didn't want the show to be what it was. It was driving. It was like the tail was wagging the dog. And yet sometimes it was fun and sometimes it was funny, but like the producers, it was all on me and the show's on me and it was on me because it's just me. It's not the housewives, it's just me. Ugh. And then the wedding. And the game was moving really fucking fast. And he was behind the scenes saying to me, what's going to happen to me in my career as a result of the show? And wanted me to like give him financial assurances because he had agreed to do this show, that he was showing up ahead of time to shoot. And so that's when I ended up paying him part of my salary. And it just, I felt like it was just a nightmare. So I ended up paying him part of my salary because I couldn't breathe and I was exasperated. And it was just like there was an imbalance in the power struggle. And it was a fucking disaster. It was a nightmare. And I'm pregnant and I'm getting married and I've sold my business and I'm buying an apartment and I'm trying to pretend that everything's good. And I'm talking to producers who kind of don't really give a shit. And it's not their fault either, but they kind of, they want the wedding to happen. And it was like 2.0. I've done this before. I've done this before. Not the same story because my ex is lovely and it was the greatest divorce in history. My first marriage, if I only knew, and we still speak now and whatever. But like where you're just like knowing it's not right and you just feel that you shouldn't be doing it, but you're doing it anyway because you just don't have you don't have like a functioning parental structure, and you've raised yourself for the most part, and you're raised by wolves, and you've been growing up in an abusive household, and no one's coming in and stepping in, and it's no one's fault. I take all the accountability, but like I did not know what's normal and what's not normal, what's it supposed to be like, what's it not supposed to be like. I hadn't had an example of two people who stayed together for a long time to tell me like this is right, this is wrong. I had no sounding board, and therapists don't tell you what to do. They just like talk to you. They don't like intervene and be like, no, there's just no person. And friends have their own. You're talking to producers, and you're also, people are trying to also save face. You're trying to pretend you're in a good relationship because you're not going to tell everybody you're not in a great relationship and you don't think it's right. And and I had a miscarriage. I was pregnant again. I had a miscarriage, and I was so relieved. I was so incredibly relieved. And we were laying in bed, and he used to say to me, you're like a block of ice, because I did not want to be intimate. I did not want to have sex. I did not respect him. I did not want to have sex at all. And he used to say to me, it feels like this bed is a block of ice. I used to force myself, gag myself through doing it. Many of you know what that's like. It is torture. And I was relieved. And I, in a constructive way, said, I'm kind of relieved. And it was a nightmare that it happened. And I said, I'm kind of relieved because I don't think this is a healthy or positive relationship. It was like the first step to saying something. And he said to me, quote unquote, you're a real piece of shit. You know that. And the baby was in the house, and he moved out to a hotel downtown for a couple of nights. And it was a total relief. And I started to panic and started to think, how am I getting the fuck out of this? And how am I going to get divorced? I started to call lawyers and was like swirling and couldn't talk to anybody and couldn't tell anyone and didn't know what to do. The prenup kicked in after 2 years. You then give the opposite party 10% of the increase in value of what your business was when you walked into the marriage. And the biggest problem about that was that we got together and Skinny Girl popped off and I hit the lottery right after getting married. So my whole life been broke within the small scope of when I get pregnant really fast, engaged, and then married. Within that time, I hit the lottery. And when we hit 2 years, the 10% kicks in. The reason this was so fucked up was that we didn't assign a value to what the business was walking into the marriage. So I had to then later go deconstruct and get forensic accountants for over a year, hundreds of thousands of dollars on them, to do a deep analysis to try to figure out what Skinny Girl Cocktails was worth before we got married, and then give a value 2 years later. So it was not worth nothing before we got married because I had put it on the show before we got married, because I had said Skinny Girl, because we talked about it on the reunion, because I had the jugs of the Skinny Girl. I had the logo. I was pouring it. People were obsessed with it. People were talking about it. I had multiple liquor deals coming in. I was doing it. I made a deal with my partner. We were launching it. So what was that value of putting it on TV for all this time? And that's when I put it on TV, and launching it. Then we launched it. Then it was in a bottle. Then it was the fastest growing liquor brand. So like, what was it worth from me putting it on TV? And he was trying to claim that he was helpful in it, and he wasn't helpful in it at all. Like, I mean, he was on the show with me, but it would have been another guy if it weren't him, respectfully, or it would have been a friend. It would have been my business on the show with me. And the problem was, I was trying to help him create value in his life because he kept saying he doesn't have a job and what's going to happen to him and all this. So I would say to my partners, can you meet with him and can you have him help? Can you have him help with sales? He's amazing at sales. I don't know if he's amazing at sales. He does pharmaceutical sales for years. He must be good at it. So my partners would be like, not have anything for him to do, but for me, they would like meet him and like say, fine, maybe he can do this. But it was things that he go visit stores, and we would he'd visit stores on the show, but the stores didn't need visitors. We have salespeople that visit the stores. So like, he was sort of like Fredo to them doing this, but like he wasn't adding value. He doesn't have expertise in liquor sales. And he was just like this. It was like the classic Kelly Clarkson's husband thing and like all that shit. And I think these men play into this shit because now all of a sudden they're whittling their way into your business. So in this scope of responsibility, he would handle all the emails and all the business stuff. He was helping me. Just helping me out of the goodness of his heart. He was helping me, and he was approving bills for me to sign. He was approving contracts for me to sign. So when we buy this apartment that he wanted his friend to sell and to represent, when we buy this $5 million asset, he's talking to the new realtor, and he's talking to the guy who says we should set up a trust so it's private, so no one finds out. He's pushing this trust so it's privacy. Okay, people find out in 5 minutes anyway, and we're shooting there. He's pushing this trust, okay? This is going to be hard to follow. He pushes the trust, and for the time being, for temporarily, we put it in Molly Hayden. You can call her up. She'll verify all of this. Put the trust in her name temporarily. Molly was my former assistant. So the apartment is temporarily in Molly Hayden's name. And my ex keeps saying to me, we have to get the apartment out of her name. We have to change the name. We have to change the trust name. He was obsessed with this. There were tons of emails and tons of things. So my understanding in the paperwork that I signed was that the trust was then put in my name, which is why the apartment was in my name. That was that missing step, because my team had advised me to put it in someone's name temporarily, and that was how Molly got involved. But she obviously isn't going to be the person who the apartment's name is in, so we had to get that out. But it was a sense of urgency, and he was controlling that process. That's where the mistake happened that I didn't catch. So the new and I didn't find this out for years, that I couldn't figure it out. So I tell my financial advisor, Merrill Lynch, the one who approved the money, got the money, it's my money. I tell him, yes, we signed it. The trust is in my name. The house is in my name. The apartment's in my name. That's in my name. So much to the point that we were going and doing estate planning, which also was another big argument, because my ex didn't want that the money went to my daughter. How was I taking care of him, and how was it going to him? And then he would pass it through to her. And I wanted the money to go in a trust for my daughter, okay? Except I said, fine, the apartment, which is in my name, I'll leave the apartment in your name, then I guess in a trust to go to Bryn. So I agreed to that in the lawyers thinking, and my lawyers were thinking, and I don't know why they didn't ask to see the trust, because it was a different lawyer, it's a different document, thinking that apartment is mine. So after the 2 years, the prenup kicks in. Now I write the letter. You have to write a letter. You have to mail it through the U.S. Postal Service. And I get on the phone with my lawyers, and I assure them the apartment is in my name. Days later, I hire them. We're working together. They say the apartment is not in your name. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because neither my agent nor my lawyer nor my Merrill Lynch guy nor anyone that I know ever knew that the apartment was in both of our names. Now, how the fuck am I supposed... And they're saying to me, how the fuck are you supposed to prove that you were on the cover of Forbes magazine and you're this successful businesswoman and you didn't know? And the light bulb is going off because I'm like, because Jason fucking would approve all these documents and he would have me sign all the shit all the time. All the time. And you know how that goes. It happens now sometimes. My business managers will sign off on something, or it's like a, a small deal that's not a big thing. But like it happens. And you could say it can't happen. And they used to say Oprah would write every check. It is almost, if I had to read every single sentence of every single contract, it would be debilitating. I couldn't do all these deals. And people know that. Mark Cuban doesn't read every sentence of every single thing. He probably does because he's a savant. But I mean, you have to trust somebody in the process. So I thought I was trusting my husband, and somewhere along the line, I fucking signed a document where he gave himself half the apartment. But wait, there's more. And I'm going to go in left and right and up and down because this is a 10-year divorce, but there are going to be things that take me off on paths about how you have to be careful. So no one knows how this specifically happened. No one knows. We're trying to go back. We're trying to go with Molly. We're trying to chase documents. No one can figure this fucking thing out. We can't. Okay. The apartment is in a trust. So now, got to be 2 years later. 2 years, $500,000 in legal on the apartment. Go to court, go to appeal, a million things. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my house, and this is why you are your best lawyer. Your lawyers are not you. You are the lawyers. Your lawyers are just facilitators, okay? They call them solicitors in the UK. They're facilitators. You are your lawyer. They're not mind readers. They don't know everything. And I'm like a savant about every single thing that's ever happened, every email. I'm like, where the fuck? So one day, 2 years later, one of the 3 lawyers on my team says to me, because I go back again. You always go back to the scene of the crime. When you lose something, you can't figure something out in a deal or otherwise, you go back to the scene of the crime. Where did I fucking lose that? What happened? Retrace my steps. So I go back with again, I don't know how this could happen. How could it happen? They go, I don't know how you could have it. You have to sign. You have to have a notary present, etc. I'm like, skid marks, what? A notary present? Yeah, they're like, the lawyer would be there. The notary would be there. I'm like, what are you talking about? I never met a fucking lawyer or a notary. I remember everything I do. I've never met a lawyer or a notary. I don't know why they didn't bring that up 2 years prior, but like, because the document was signed and notarized. I go, what the fuck are you talking about? Now I start going back through the documents. I find the trust. I find the notarization. I put that to the side. There's a notarization. My ex's mother is the notary. Her name is there, but she has crossed out Pennsylvania because that's where she's legally a notary. And she has written in New York, and and my signature is forged, and she has signed it. But we find out, and I don't know how we find this out, she was an expired notary. She wasn't even a legal notary at that time. So she notarized this, crossed out Pennsylvania, put in New York because she's a notary in Pennsylvania, or the reverse, whichever one the document needed. She crossed out whatever it said because and I have all these in booklets. I have all of this paperwork. I have all the receipts. Now I go to all my notebooks of all the emails. I go back through the emails. The lawyer that we hired, but Jason was totally dealing with. He found a lawyer. The realtor gives us a lawyer. We're dealing with a lawyer. I found several emails between him and the guy with my ex saying, just put the trust in mine and put me on the trust. You need to put me on the trust. I wasn't on those emails where he was saying to put himself on the trust. I was conveniently left off of those emails. He said, put me on the trust. And then later, after this thing was signed, this lawyer sent my ex an email saying, one of these days we have to meet face to face, indicating to me that he's never met him face to face, much less have I ever met him face to face, much less has he been in our presence with a notary to notarize his documents. That's what I then fucking take to the lawyers. That's how we go to the appeal. That's how, after having padlocks in my room, which I'm going to get into also, having a lock at my door for years and having my assistants work in one quadrant in the office with a padlock on that door, and my ex not leaving my apartment, which is legal, which is mine. I vacate my apartment. Years later, that's how I finally got my apartment back. So next time, we will discuss what went on in that torture den, which is that apartment, which is what went on in court, and what went on with my assistants, what went on with my staff, what went on with private detectives, what went on with being hacking, what went on with being followed, what went on with all of that. That all will be what went on with the padlocks and with my daughter, what went on with after school and how I would be in heels and my talk show makeup and hair and not want to go back into my house, and I would have to like go just take Bryn somewhere in a car to like Barnes and Noble or like the park in like stilettos and full makeup, because my home was a torture chamber, and the judge, everybody tells every person, the person who leaves is abandoning. It's called abandonment. So the reason I stayed in the torture chamber is if you leave, you are considered you've abandoned the marriage and it could affect your custody. But I ended up leaving, and the judge said, thank God somebody was smart enough to do what's best for this child. Because when the first day we ever went to the judge with the 2 lawyers for the custody situation, and I'd put out a statement saying, we will be family forever. We will do this amicably. I genuinely thought we could do it amicably. I wanted slightly more than 50-50 custody because I knew I had a very rigorous schedule, and I proposed because I knew that I would be flexible and give him back days all the time, and I knew that he wouldn't, which is a foreshadowing because he didn't. We'll talk about that too. We have to talk about later the phone calls and like the rigidity with the schedule. So I wanted it to be amicable. I wanted it to be, I wanted us to be a family. I wanted it to work. I wanted us to do holidays together. It started a den of hell. The most significant torture I've ever been through in my entire life was that apartment. That apartment was a hellhole. That $5 million apartment that ended up being worth $7 million was a hellhole and suffering. And the first day we went to the judge, met with the judge, she said, a custody battle is like watching your child drown and begging you for help. And I was crying, and I thought, yay, he's going to hear that, and we're going to resolve this, and it's going to be fine. And very shortly after that, I offered him $2.2 million, a $2.2 million package, including an apartment that would come back to me. I think it was an apartment in Bryn's name. I think that was in one of the offers. An apartment to live in that would come back to me later or be in Bryn's name or some version of that. And he had Eleanor Alter, Ron Perlman's lawyer, this famous lawyer, who told him to take the deal and then fired him afterwards for not taking the deal, because it was in the very beginning before he spent any money on legal, and it was $2.2 million on a 2-year marriage, plus what ended up being $7,500 a month in child support. $2.2 million on a 2-year marriage. So paying plus money he made on the show. So he made several $100,000 in the show. Plus now he's 2.5 years in, and he's gonna have a $2.7 million package for 2 years. Turns it down. Wants at least 4 to 5 times that. First lawyer fires him.